I think we have to do more in terms of the reforms, both at European level and national level. At European level, we have to complete the single market. There has been a lot of national resistance to that. And in national terms, some of the reforms started. For instance, the countries that had bailout programs have done a lot, but we should continue so that we can increase the productivity levels of Europe. Reform of labor market, reform of public administration, social security systems, namely retirement age, the reforms of tax system, education, innovation. These are matters where Europe has to do more, but I believe with the lessons learned from the crisis, there is now a greater awareness about the need of these reforms, and I believe we are basically on the right track. I think this is one of the huge challenges we have today in Europe, the refugee and migrant crisis. It's a moral, political and economic. Morally, we have to integrate and to accept those refugees. It's our humanitarian duty. Politically, it raises very important challenges. Some of our countries have not been exposed in the past to this kind of migration. Also, in cultural terms, they are not used to deal with people from other ethnicities or from other religion. And so this puts a challenge. And as you know, there are some countries of Europe where we have extremist, xenophobe parties that may use this once again against Europe and against, let's say, the balance of our societies. Economically, it can be a good thing if those migrants are integrated and trained, if we don't build new ghettos, but if they give a contribution, because in fact Europe demographically needs young people and needs more workers demographically, so that we can sustain also our social security system. So I think it can be positive from an economic point of view, provided it is properly managed from a political perspective. We have seen that sometimes it's under the pressure of the crisis that people decide to do what before they could not do. And that explains why some of the countries that were the more vulnerable, from Ireland to Portugal to Spain, have done reforms faster than others. But I think now what we need is leadership. I think we need to draw the lessons of the crisis. We need to understand that Europe has to increase its productivity. There are problems of competitiveness in this globalization age. So now, the important thing is that we focus on implementation. There was already enough debate, and even at the highest level in the European Union, in many meetings there was a consensus about that, with some differences, but basically consensus. Now it's about delivery, and that's what I think the public opinion should demand from the leaders of the European Union countries. Competition is certainly a way, competition policy, of promoting some of these reforms, because it makes our economy more efficient. And there is, in the decisions taken by the European Commission in competition cases or state aid cases, always a perspective of the economic efficiency. So yes, it helps, but it is not enough. Some of the matters are not linked to the competition policy. They have to do with the capability of the member states to agree now on some positive steps to break some monopolies or oligopolies, to break some barriers that exist. For instance, in the digital market, which is absurd. We have today still 28 digital markets in Europe. And of course, that explains why we are less competitive than others in that field. So for that, the European Commission, when some concrete decisions come, can help, but on its own it's not enough. I think Europe has great assets. I know the problems, and I've lived through those problems, but when you compare with other parts of the world that are in real deep crisis, for instance, the regions where those refugees are now coming, Europe has fundamental stability from the rule of law system. I think it's a safer bet to invest in Europe than in some of the emerging economies, to be honest, because they have not yet experienced some of the phases that we had to go through. Now, of course, we have structural problems like the demographic one, and that explains also part of the current pessimism in Europe. An aging population tends to be more pessimistic than a more vibrant young population. But basically, Europe has the resources. It's the biggest trade bloc in the world. It has great resources in innovation. We have the internal market. We are by value still the biggest integrated market. And we have the intelligence and the criticism, the self-critical capacity also to deal with issues. And on average, economically and socially, in Europe we live better than in most parts of the world. Now, let's not show complacency. Let's understand that the world is changing. But if there is enough leadership, I don't see why we should not adapt with the resources we have to the very exciting challenges of globalization age.